Thanks to Roberta for reading our scripture, the story of Mary anointing Jesus. It's a story that is actually found in all four of our Gospels. And when the same story is found in all four of the Gospels, it kind of tells us it's important. It says, pay attention, there's something about this story. So all four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, have a story about Jesus being anointed with the costly perfume. Each of the Gospels tell the story a little different, though. Matthew and Mark, in their story, it's an unnamed woman, and she pours the ointment on Jesus' head. In the story, we hear that someone in the group of disciples, we don't know who, but at least one of them is upset about the cost of the ointment and complains. In Luke's Gospel, we're told that the woman is a sinner. She's still unnamed, but we're told she's a sinner, and that she wept at Jesus' feet. And then she wiped his feet that were covered with her tears. She wiped his feet with her hair and then anointed him with the costly ointment. And then we have John's Gospel, which you just heard. And in it, we have names for those involved. The woman is Mary, Mary of Bethany. Mary and Martha are sisters. And Mary is Lazarus' sister as well. And she anoints Jesus' feet with the costly oil, wiped them with her hair, and then we know it's Judas who complains, at least according to John. The stories are a bit different, and yet they all have one thing in common: the woman. Whether it's Mary or some other woman, in each of the four stories, the woman understands the importance of this moment when no one else did. She recognized the significance of that moment, and that recognition, her ability to be in the moment, led her to a connection with Jesus not experienced by anyone else. The rest of them, they all missed it. She got it. She got it so much that her connection with Jesus was profound in that moment. I was reading the scripture this week and had to ask myself the question, how often do I recognize the potential in a moment? I would love to say that I do it all the time, that all day long I'm looking for the potential of the moment, but that's not true. It's not. I'd love to say that. There are probably more days that go by where I have missed the moments all day long. Recognizing the potential of the moment and then acting on it in that moment, that's not an easy thing to do. We can get distracted by all the other stuff going on so easily that we miss the moment. And then I remembered something this week, and as much as I hate to admit it, I had to admit that my mom was right. When I was a kid, she was right. It's a lesson that she taught me that I'm often needing reminding of. Because when I was a kid, I don't know if you're like me, when I was a kid, and probably still some now, I would spend lots of time daydreaming about things that were to come, events that I knew were coming up, or things that I hoped would happen. Man, I could map it all out in my head and figure out exactly what would happen, how it was going to go. I planned things in my head long before they ever happened. The first day of school, what was it going to be like? How was it going to go? My first job, how exciting would it be and how much fun would I have every day? My first boyfriend, how he was going to respond exactly the way I wanted him to all the time. Man, I could plan it all out in my head. And then, more often than not, I was disappointed. Because, of course, rarely does everything go exactly the way we had it in our head. So I would be upset, or I would be disappointed, or I would be frustrated because I kept missing the possibilities of the moment because of everything I had created in my head. Sometimes I wonder if it's human nature to play out scenarios before they ever happen, to plan things. If you ever planned a vacation and decided how you were going to experience, how much fun everyone was going to have, even if you had to force them. Never, Jim says. I'm going to ask Jack and Luke. Or as we plan for family gatherings like Easter coming up in a couple weeks, Do we already think we know how everybody's going to get along or not get along? How it's going to go before the day's ever even gotten here? Have you ever had to have a conversation with a boss or an employee, a partner, a friend, a coworker about an issue, and you've already had the conversation in your head before you actually go to them? You think you know how they're going to respond? That is actually my specialty. My husband will tell you that. I can play a conversation both sides. I can tell you how James is going to respond to something, whether he's actually known he's going to respond that way. Play it out in your head, both sides. And then sometimes I start interacting with my husband as if we've actually had that conversation and he's responded the way I thought he was going to respond. He's in trouble and he doesn't even know why. Have you ever done that? Maybe you don't want to admit it. I do it more than I know I should. I get it all in my head. This is how it's going to be. This is how it should be. This is how someone else should respond. I get an expectation about a situation or a person or myself. And it never works out that way. And I've learned expectations can be dangerous things sometimes. Because in essence, expectations are counter to the idea of living in the moment. Because our expectations, when we've already decided something, when we have an expectation of someone else, it blinds us to what really is in that moment. Instead of seeing the moment for what it truly is, we're looking at it through lenses clouded by our own assumptions, our own decisions, our own expectations, our own conversations that we've already had. And then we either make the situation fit the box we've already created, or we don't recognize the differences, or we're disappointed when we recognize the reality. Expectations can get in the way of the moment. I kind of think it's why the disciples responded the way they did in the scripture from today. Because Mary, this woman, didn't act in any sort of way that was expected for her to act. She should have been with Martha in the kitchen, serving and getting ready and doing the things she was supposed to do, and she did something totally unexpected. And the disciples couldn't recognize the significance. They couldn't recognize the power, the possibility. They couldn't recognize what was happening. And so they criticized her, and they missed the point of the whole thing. My guess is, for me, that's true more often than not as well. When I've started with those expectations, I miss the whole thing. Because when I've had that conversation with someone in my head and I've played out both sides and I already think I know what's going to happen and how it's going to go to the point that I almost don't feel like I need to have the conversation, you miss the whole moment. Expectations get in the way. And it's expectations that we do, I think, without even recognizing it. It's not always intentional. We put expectations on people or relationships or situations or ourselves, and they become a barrier to relationship. They become a barrier to recognizing God's presence in the moment. They become a barrier to our openness, I think. Have you ever walked down the street and made an assumption about somebody you passed solely based on how they look? I don't necessarily want to admit that I've done that, but I've done that. Or you meet someone for the first time and you're sure that you're either going to like them or not like them. One of my closest friends right now is somebody that I never thought I would like. When I first met her, I was sure we would just kind of know each other but not really ever be close, and she's one of my best friends now. But I could have not let that happen because of the expectations. Because if we exist in a state of expectation, it limits our ability to be present to God and to each other, to fully experience what life has to offer us, to fully experience what God has to offer us, just because something doesn't fit a preconceived notion of what we think it should. But there's a counter side to this, and this takes me back to what my mom taught me as a kid. I did have to tell her I was preaching on her today. I thought it was only fair to admit that, yeah, she might have been right sometimes. When I would get in those mindsets where I would play something out and have it all determined in my head months before it ever happened, and then I would get disappointed afterwards, and I would come to her frustrated and upset, and we would talk, and she finally figured out this 3 simple words to help me get out of my head, to help me approach situations different. And she would just say these 3 words of basically a question. She would say, expectation or expectancy. I'd have to go, oh yeah, you're right. Expectation or expectancy. Because expectancy is different than expectation. It opens us to what might be rather than leading us to define what should be. Expectancy still has that state of anticipation and excitement about something that might be coming, but rather than deciding what it should look like, it's thinking of all the possibilities about what may come. A state of expectancy opens the door to relationships, to people. It actually opens the door to us changing our mind or admitting that maybe we didn't have it right the first time. There's always potential and possibility for something new. Where expectations can become a barrier, expectancy opens the door, creates possibility. So for me, the goal is always to live in expectancy, to be present to the moment, to recognize what might be in this moment. I think it's what Mary tells us. She recognized the potential of that moment when she anointed Jesus' feet, and it became an act of love and grace. The disciples, they didn't recognize it. She didn't fit their expectations, and it became a moment of annoyance for them. For Mary, it was a faith-filled moment. For the disciples, it was a distraction. So as I read the scripture throughout the week, I kind of kept having to ask myself, am I annoyed more often than I'm awed? And if so, maybe I'm missing the moments. How can we be awed at the unexpected? How can we open ourselves to seeing God in ways we never thought possible? Because it's not about our expectations, it's about an expectancy. Mary, I think, teaches us an important lesson. How do we live open to this moment, to every moment, so that at the end of the day, when we look back on our day, we have been awed more than anything else?